What is up, everybody? Mr. Curtis here. Welcome to our DBQ explanation on Maritime, Indian Ocean, Portuguese influence, blah, blah, blah. This is the DBQ you did on May 14th. Before we start this, make sure you have your DBQ opened up. Read the comments that I wrote before we start this, just so you get a sense of kind of what I saw versus what you saw. And then you can kind of go through here and check some of the info that I have versus what you have as we go into a little more depth here. So first off, this is from 2019. This is last year's DBQ, but it had 7 documents because we weren't in COVID-19 quarantine. I knocked 2 of those documents out to make it 5. I don't like this DBQ. I think it's a little hard, to be honest with you. And just so you know, these documents are much longer than what you're going to see from based on the one sample exam, which I will put out online for Tuesday as an option. But this is a little bit harder. I think it's a little bit longer. So if you were able to finish this in 45 minutes, I think you're in really good shape in terms of timeline and finishing and whatnot. And I also just think this is a hard DBQ. I think the DBQ is going to be a little bit easier than this just because they want to make it a little easier, but we'll see if I'm right. This is the question: evaluate the extent to which Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean in the 16th century. Couple key words here. We're talking transformed is our verb, so you got to think what change over time, comparison, or cause and effect is the best to answer this. I would say transformed could be an effect. Transform could be a change. So just figure out how you want to word your thesis sentence before you do that. Also, 16th century means the 1500s. We're in the 21st century and it's the 2000s. So just to keep that in the back of your mind, people get a little confused. Again, I don't want to run through every single word here for each of these. This is a source. This is the advice given by Muslim merchants to the Hindu ruler concerning the arrival of the Portuguese. So the Portuguese are getting there. Also, it's recorded in the history and discovery, blah, blah, blah. This is by a Portuguese historian published in 1551. So this is a Portuguese historian writing in 1551, 50 years after advice was given by Muslim merchants to the Hindu rulers. So this is 50 years later. And essentially, what it's basically saying is it's expressing, and I have the basic meaning here. You could have taken something else out of it. Totally fine. You're going to argue the documents how you want. I can't say this enough. Your job is to take these documents and argue something. How is this document showing how the Indian Ocean was transformed? This is what I got. This is expressing Muslim merchants' opposition to the Hindu ruler of Calicut, welcoming the Portuguese, and warns rulers to be cautious. He's basically the Muslim merchants are essentially saying, watch out for these Portuguese. Just be cautious of them. Let's not just let them in. There's 2 hips that I have for this. Pick one of them. You could have done something else, and that's okay as long as you argue it. One is historical context. This is written 50 years after the events when Portugal expanded the region. So this is written, it's about 1500 when the Portuguese are really getting there for the second time. But this is written in 1551, 50 years later after the Portuguese have expanded already. So we're reflecting back after the Portuguese have already come to dominate it. And the author is recording events in the spread of Portuguese power. So this is about how the Portuguese power expanded. So he's starting kind of early in the timeline. That's historical context, and that's okay. The other is perspective. It is written by, now, obviously, it's a Portuguese historian, but what he has is the advice given by Muslim merchants, and these Muslim merchants are fearful of Portuguese expansion in the region and are trying to convince others to be worried. That's the hip. All right, so I'm taking right out of here Muslim merchants, talking about, and this is advice, and I'm taking what's in the document to explain how what's in the source impacts the document, because these Muslim merchants are worried. They're trying to convince others to be worried as well. And it's advice being given about these Portuguese traders. Next up is, this is the second document. This is a government official. He's employed by the Portuguese trading post in the Malabar coast. And it's a travel narrative published in Portugal in 1516. Basically what he's saying is he's describing the past wealth and independence of Muslim merchants in Calicut, but states that most of the Muslim merchants have left. The hip on this, sorry for the typo here, is I would either do perspective or purpose on this. It's a Portuguese government official. He's on the Malabar coast. And he most likely would have wanted to emphasize the positive effects of Portuguese trading in that region. He's in there, he's in that region, and he's going to say, things are good. I like what we got going on here. That's his perspective. That's his purpose. And he's a government official, and he's writing his experience. The other is historical context. This is written in the early years. Again, this is 1516. This is early years of exploration into the Indian Ocean. So it's early years of Portuguese establishing a presence in India. and the account seeks to emphasize the Portuguese experience and the Portuguese achievements by already displacing Muslims. So that's the historical context. It's early on. What's the purpose? You could also say it's a narrative or a travel narrative. So he's writing about what he's seeing. That would have worked as well. This is Alcar. He's a ruler. He's a sultanate, which is on the island of Sumatra, which is in Indonesia, which is in Southeast Asia. And he's a Muslim leader in Southeast Asia, and he's writing to the Ottoman Sultan, Suleiman I, in 1566. And basically what he's saying is he's cautious that the Sultan, he's cautioning the Sultan against trusting the Portuguese, and basically saying that they should build up defenses. Be careful of the Portuguese, build up your defenses. We're Muslims, we need to work together. So two things. One, historical context. I wouldn't expect anyone to know this, but this is a historical context. The Ottomans are expanding westward at this point in the mid-1500s. We have the Gunpowder Empires. Everyone's expanding. Remember, expansion brings conflict. And it brought the Ottomans into conflict with several European powers, including Portugal, over the Mediterranean Indian Ocean trade. So that's the historical context of this. So he's basically saying, watch out for these Portuguese, but in the context of there's a lot going on in the world. We also have the intended audience or purpose. This is private advice. This is one ruler to another. All right, it's a letter from one to another, and they're both high-level officials. He's giving very specific or blunt analysis of the situation. He's talking about the dangers the Ottomans and advantages they would have if they can compete freely. So the idea that it's one Muslim ruler to another, and so you're going to get a really specific analysis of what's going on here. Here we got a Venetian trader, Federici. This is published in Venice. He's describing local agent broker system for trade in Cambay. Basically saying how trade works in Cambay, as well as the low price and low quality pepper exchange in Koken. So he's talking about trade of pepper, and he's from Italy, from Venice. So two things. We have intended audience here. It's intended for a Venetian merchant audience, we can imagine, because it's the voyage and travel to East India. It may have emphasized the potential commercial opportunities in India, for example, by suggesting that only low-quality pepper is being sold to the Portuguese, while the high-quality pepper remains available for purchase in India. So he might be saying we should go to India, and the Portuguese are getting some low-quality pepper. That's the intended audience. We could also do purpose here. The Venetians and Portuguese were rivals, so he may have wanted to point out the limitations of the power of Portugal. That would work as well. I would have stuck away from the hip on this one, but that's just me. Last is last year, there were a lot of funny memes about this after the AP exam, but this is just a box. And people were like, what the heck? It's just a box. What am I supposed to write about with a box? But the key is in the source here, right? It's made of teak, ebony, and other precious hardwoods with ivory detail. It shows that it's a luxury good. It's a luxury box. It's a fancy freaking box, right? And it's made in India, and it was going to Portugal around 1600. So the meaning is it shows a box inlaid with items found in the Indian Ocean trade region. So again, at this point, I would say a lot of different stuff about trade products here, and my brain would start saying, wait a second, that 4 and 5 are all about these luxury goods or products, whether it's pepper, whether it's these special boxes. And the box the historical context is this box was made for export to Portugal and shows how important the region was to the Portuguese around 1600. I don't know if I'd go there. Intended audience, the box shows the increase in luxury goods. Someone made this, right? Who's the intended audience of this box, right? Who is the intended audience? Not to see this picture here, but to have this box. And it's really to show luxury goods and to show that European elites who are making money can afford these luxury boxes and want to display it for people to see and to show how their power and wealth. That's a hard one, but that's a good one and something that we talked about that you could possibly, I don't know if in the 45 minutes, but it could work. So I would probably have gone in terms of HIP with probably 1, 2, and 3. I probably would have skipped 4 and 5, but if you went with them, more power to you. Hopefully you got it right. In terms of groupings, a lot of different groupings. I just did something very basic, something I think that people could do, whether you feel like you're the top level student or the bottom level student, wherever you feel you are. I feel like this is a group that you could have made. One is Muslims not trusting the European influence, and one is a European desire for Asian goods. So here's my thesis. That's what I'm doing. 1, 2, and 3, the Muslims not trusting these Portuguese influence. 4 and 5, European desire for Asian goods. Let me go to my thesis real quick, and then I'll come back to the contextualization. In the 16th century, the Portuguese transformed maritime trade in the Indian Ocean. That's just straight from the question. With Muslims not trusting the Portuguese, while European desire for South Asian goods remained. Okay? So I'm saying this is what changed. This is what stayed the same. I'm going to group it like this: 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 5. And when I use each document, I'm going to show how 1, 2, and 3 showed Muslims not trusting the Portuguese, and 4 and 5 showed a European desire for South Asian goods and how it remained. Here's my contextualization. I would have hopped onto that Unit 2 review sheet with Indian Ocean trade, and I would have just hammered Indian Ocean trade on this. That's what I would have done. I would have had that review sheet in front of me, and I would have just gone boom, 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 basically whatever you have in there for your notes on that. You also could have went European exploration on this, finding quicker routes to India and China, Portugal and Spain lead the way. So that would have been Unit 4, Age of Exploration, kind of 4.1. That's where I would have went with this. If you really wanted to get crazy, you could have talked about the importance of India and China in trade during the previous time period, and how luxury goods from the Indian Ocean trade and from East Asia are going into European markets by 1450, and it leads to them trying to get it. So that's where we went. In terms of outside evidence, I would have went outside evidence, a lot of gunpowder empire stuff and a lot of European trade stuff. So there's stuff with Southeast Asia you could have dropped in there with Sumatra and some of this trade area. But I really would have probably went information on the Ottoman Empire with their expansion and trade. There's a little mention of Suleiman there and that competition. You could have added to that, and this distrust of Europeans and this war between Europeans and Muslims. You could have did a little Safavid as well, that the Safavid were involved in putting the Ottomans in check and stopping Ottoman expansion, even though they're Muslim. So this kind of additional, not only are Muslims not trusting Europeans, but some Muslims aren't trusting other Muslims. Sunni versus Shia would have worked as well. And then Portuguese merchant activity and trade in Southeast Asia would have worked. You could have went with a little South Asia. I would not have dropped in the Mughals at this point, but possibly could have if you wanted to. Just that Hindu-Muslim, that document 1 showing Muslims giving advice to Hindus could have worked as well. So that's what I got. That's a lot of stuff. It's 45 minutes for you to do all that. And I know it's hard. I know it's tough, and it is A-okay. There's nothing wrong with it being tough. So that's what I got. You got any questions, you let me know. This is the last official practice one we're going to do. I will give you one more practice, an optional one, but I'm not going to have time to be able to grade it because it's going to be too close to the exam. There will be one more optional one, and that optional one will be the official released exam, practice exam for 2020. So you can give it a shot. Even if you just look at it and process it, it's totally up to you. But you'll notice the documents are much shorter than this. I think that's a good thing. Anyway, that's what I got. Miss y'all. I'm out.